7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You'll never have the sacred stone.
Oh, this you crazy mother.
Hey everybody, it's time to talk tipping. Tipping in the Philippines. Now, as a popular bar and restaurant owner in the Philippines, this is a topic I might be able to give you a little help with. So, are Filipinos working in the service industry accustomed to, expecting, and relying on tips? Hell yeah, they are. But in my honest opinion, that tip should only be presented if warranted. If you're at my restaurant and bar, I really hope you don't tip if you don't think they deserve it. Now, before we actually start talking about tipping, let's just discuss a little bit about the Philippine service industry. The minimum wage that's associated with, well, practically 100% of that entire industry. Now, depending on where you are in the Philippines, the minimum wage for the service industry is basically from 175 pesos to about 300 pesos a day. And to put that into perspective for people from North America, just imagine 175 pesos is $4.62 Canadian or $3.48 American. And that high rate of 300 pesos a day, that's what I pay. And again, that is a high rate for the service industry. That is $8 Canadian per day or $5.97 American a day. We're not talking an hour. That is one day. And in the Philippines, it's not an 8-hour day, it's a 12-hour day. So, are Filipino service industry employees accustomed to, expecting, and hoping for a tip from foreigners? Absolutely, without a doubt. Not only that, but they're relying on it. Now, having said all of that, the last thing and the worst thing you can do is feel sorry for these employees. But again, if warranted, a tip should definitely be left for these hardworking individuals. Now, before my Filipino viewers get into a hissy fit, especially people in the service industry, and Filipinos in that service industry, don't tell me that you will not get into a hissy fit, because I know you. I am a bar owner and a restaurant owner. I know the hissy fits that my staff get into when they're not left what they think would be a deserving tip. Now, before you start screaming, "Cheap Charlie," and throwing shit all over the place, you need to realize the cultural practices of tipping around the world. Not every culture tips. Not every foreigner that comes to the Philippines is accustomed to tipping. Not only that, but your service may have sucked. And if your service sucked, I'm not going to leave you a tip. And if your service sucked, nobody should leave you a tip. I know in my bars and restaurants, if your service sucks, don't expect a tip. And having said that, now my foreign friend, if you receive shitty service, do not tip. Do not tip for the sake of the fact that you know these service industry people are receiving such small wages. That is the wage of the country. So if you're getting shitty service, the worst thing you can do is tip, because these people are never going to change if they keep receiving tips like they do for shitty service. And believe me, if you've been to the Philippines or you're coming to the Philippines, if you've been here, you know the service in most areas absolutely, positively sucks. And if you're just coming here, you're going to find that out very quickly. So do not tip if the service sucks. Now, backtracking just a bit, as for cultural practices of tipping. Okay, North Americans tip, especially Canadians. All right? I tell my staff, if a Canadian comes into the bar, if you want to tip, this is it. Americans, they do tip, they should tip, they're accustomed to it. If they don't, and you provide them good services, then they're cheap Charlies and just pricks. Okay? Now, as for the rest of the world, Euros, they don't tip. Europeans, maybe a little bit because, they think that they should be tipping in the Philippines, but generally in Europe, they won't tip. Asians, all right, Filipinos, you're Asian. You know Asians don't tip. A Filipino will tip you before a Korean will tip you, a Chinese will tip you, or any other Asian country. They don't tip. As for Aussies and Kiwis, Yeah, they tip, so don't let them off the hook either. Now, back to my foreign friends. Okay, it doesn't matter where you're from. If you're watching this, now you know that tips are expected and definitely relied upon here in the Philippines. So you should definitely do it. Now, back to that practice of what you should tip. There is definitely such a thing as over-tipping. Believe me. The last thing I'm asking you to do is over-tip somebody. 10% is perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. It's a great tip. It's the standard around the world. So why change it here? Now, the one thing you do have to be careful of are restaurants that already include and add on a 10% tip on top of your bill. Okay? Check and make sure that this is not happening. Or if it is, well, then the 10% is already there. Do not leave anything other than maybe the loose change that comes, but you're over tipping. If you leave another 10%, that's 20%. Well, if you want to be a baller, go for it. But again, if it's included in the bill, don't leave anything more. You're not helping the situation, and I can honestly guarantee you and promise you that you're not going to receive any better service from that point, or if you happen to come back to that facility again. Now, if I'm not already in shit on this video, this section is going to definitely get me into shit because I know I'm going to forget somebody in the service industry. But when you're in the Philippines, or pretty much when you're anywhere, these are basically the people I'm thinking of tipping while I'm there. Okay, you have your waiters and waitresses, that's a given, everybody knows that. Doorman at the hotel, definitely. You know, you want to be taken well care of and directed to good spots. A doorman's always important. Bellhop, the dude that's going to carry and hump those bags up to your room, for sure. Bartenders, very important, okay? If you want a good service, if you want a good drink, and you want an expedited drink the next time, take care of your bartenders. Cab drivers, and then trikes and jeepney drivers. These poor bastards, they're kind of forgotten about. You know, I rarely trip. If I'm going from point A to point B, I rarely, tip a trike driver or a jeepney driver, especially jeepney drivers. Now, a trike driver, if he goes out of his way, if we're not just going from point A to point B, but if I have to stop at a store and do a little running around and he's going to be patient enough to wait for me and, you know, go above and beyond his call of duty, definitely I'll leave him a tip. Now, the next person that you will need to think of, especially if you haven't been to the Philippines, are car or bike attendants, okay? And what this is, they're not usually official, all right? But they might as well be for that block. Now, if you're parking somewhere on a busy street or somewhere, you know, kind of shady, I mean, everywhere looks shady down here, but somewhere shady, and I don't mean somewhere cool, I mean shady, you want to make sure that when you get back to your car or bike, it's in the same condition it was when you parked it. So if the guy comes up to you before you get out of your car, well, you don't tip him at that point. But you just say hello, okay? And just acknowledge that you know he's there. He acknowledges that he knows you're there. And when you get back, just slip him a little something. You know, 50 pesos. Slip him that. Your car is going to be safe. And here's a guy that will remember you, I promise. Now, the next person, the last person I have on my list is room service. And that's without saying. That's pretty much my list. Like I mentioned, I know there must be other service industry employees who right now are probably freaking out, but I'm sorry I missed you. Hopefully these other people that are listening to this video won't forget you, and you'll get your deserved shake at the stick as well. Now, tipping is definitely a very personal practice. Nobody should be told to tip. Nobody should be told how much to tip. But definitely, Filipinos rely on those tips. My waitresses and waiters and bartenders and my entire staff definitely relies on those tips. They make more on the tips than they do on their wages. Now, does that mean I'm going to pay them more? No, because it's the country standard. And as I mentioned, basically the country standard and the world standard for tipping is 10%. And that's all I ask you to leave if you receive good service and service up to your standards. And boys, this includes bar girls. If you're hanging out in the bar, don't over-tip them either. You're not doing anybody any good. And those are my 2 pesos on tipping. That's it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if so, I'd love it if you subscribed. I'm the Grubby Pirate, and I am out.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You'll never have the sacred stone.
Oh, this you crazy mother.